r/NoSleep. Posted by you/Kessel, the Viking. I'm a nightly custodian for a wax museum. One of the figures has come to life. Listen, I may not be a well-learned individual, but I know when something is or isn't supposed to happen. Especially when it involves inanimate objects like wax figures. They are simple, fake, and most importantly, not alive. However, recently something unexplainable happened to me while I was working, and this is the only place where I think my experience might be understood. So, let me begin. I've been working as a custodian for a wax museum in the next town over. Typically the cleaners don't operate during the day because the general populace would find it distracting, so I work at night. Whatever keeps the boss happy, I thought. The museum has all manner of figures. It has celebrities, pop culture figures, athletes, and musicians. But, in the far corner of the leftmost wing is one figure that has no name. It is only known as the unknown mannequin. Which I suppose is technically a name. Most children shy away from it, some have even cried after looking at it. Parents and other adults have reported feeling uneasy and sick to their stomachs after having gone near it. Personally, I found it unsettling as well because it really had no business being in the museum. I once asked management about the figure, to which they said, it was here when the new owners bought the place and the previous owner insisted on them keeping it on display. For whatever reason they agreed, and now it's your job to keep it spotless. I suppose I shouldn't have expected anything less. The figure has no face, that is, not one that's recognizable. It seems to have been in a fire at some point. The body is charred and melted in various places, and it's positioned right under a lamp that has an old bulb in it. The bulb barely produces enough light to let people know a figure actually resides in that shadowy corner. Just because the previous owner wished for it to be displayed, it doesn't mean it has to be displayed well. But perhaps that's the whole reason weird things started to happen. It first began when one of the children claimed the ugly one moved. How do I know this? Because I'm friends with the night guard Jerry. He gets the scoop of the day during the changing of the guard and always passes the drama straight to me. You think I'd actually work in a museum filled with lifelike replicas of humans in the dead of night alone? No way. I've always got Jerry, and on the nights he can't make it, there's always a replacement. Anyway, he mentioned that incident with the child, and I thought it was pretty strange but not uncommon. Children often perceive things differently than adults, and the darkness plays tricks on all our minds. I assumed it was just a mistake, but as each day passed, more peculiarities arose. The museum hadn't been open for very long before I started working there. In fact, some of the figures were still being moved in during my first night, but that unknown mannequin was there since day one. I can't remember the reason why the last owner sold the place, but the new owners took no time to get the business up and running again. Once the customers began to flow, the place really livened up. That corner though, the one with the mannequin? The air there always felt heavier each day that went by without someone noticing it. I think management liked it that way because the whole thing was just strange and, quite frankly, bad for business. I digress. The second incident occurred when a child strayed away from their family and found themselves standing at the base of the mannequin. From what Jerry told me, the child began to scream, and when their family reached them, they apparently had scratch marks all over their face. I mean, something definitely happened because I had to clean the blood up later, and I didn't say anything to anyone at the time, but the mannequin had a spot of red on its leg. I kind of brushed it off because the whole figure was malformed and seriously messed up, and I'm not perfect, so I could have overlooked it every time it was cleaned. The spot could have been anything. Now I know it likely wasn't just coincidental. After hearing about these things that were going on during the day, I started to get jealous. Not because I wanted to be injured by the unknown mannequin, but because nothing interesting happens at night. Jerry usually follows me around as I clean and goes on and on about his life and any number of random other things. I welcome his company though, because as I said before, I could never work in a place like that alone. Within the last week, however, the oddities have skyrocketed. Monday night, I clocked in as usual, and the moment I set foot near the exhibits, I knew something was amiss. The unknown mannequin had moved, but it was only slightly. Now, I know what you're thinking, someone could have messed with it during the day, and while that may be true, you have to realize that someone comes through after closing and corrects the positions of the figures. Never once has the unknown mannequin been out of place, until that night. As I said, the change was hardly noticeable, but as the custodian, I've grown familiar with each figure, and that means I know exactly how they should be. The unknown mannequin is always facing towards the entrance from its darkened corner with both hands at its side. The mannequin doesn't have any clothes, it's just a barren wax figure with no discernible features, but that doesn't make it any less creepy. Especially when its head is suddenly facing a different direction, and by different, I mean looking, relatively speaking, right at me. I'm not saying its gaze was following me, but as I passed by with the vacuum, it definitely turned. I didn't see it move, but I know it was looking directly towards the front door, just as it always does before my work carried me past. When I tell you my entire body jolted with a fearful shock, I mean I almost took off running right then and there. As I look back, I probably should have. I mentioned it to Jerry and he thought I was playing some kind of dumb prank on him, since it was one of the only nights he didn't follow me, because when he watched the camera footage, the feed cut out just as I approached the unknown mannequin. When it came back on, its head had turned. I told Jerry that not only would I never do that, but that the unknown mannequin doesn't have moving parts either. He said, "I'm pretty sure it does," and refused to go out and check. Regardless, I was glad to have finished cleaning up that general area for the night. The next night was a bit of a conundrum. After clocking in, I talked with Jerry for a good half an hour about random bullshit before hitting the museum floor. He grabbed his flashlight and key ring as I walked away and began following me like he normally would. Once my rounds reached the leftmost wing where the unknown mannequin was, Jerry pointed something out in a rather dramatic fashion. "Bro. Ozzy's fucking head is gone." He was right. The head of Ozzy Osbourne, the famous frontman, was missing. You may think that might be quite comical. But I never told you that I happened to glance at the cameras before beginning the night's work, and I assure you, Ozzy's head was still there. What's even more concerning is that, although the figure has moving parts, it still takes immense force to separate any one part from another. Jerry hadn't moved it because we walked in together and my eyes hadn't left his stocky form since clocking in. So who did it? Poor Jerry was so scared he immediately marched back to the security office and checked the cameras. However, just like the previous night, the feed was interrupted. 1 minute the head was there and the next, it was gone. We later found it affixed to the body of Tom Brady, which was equally as perplexing because the whereabouts of Tom's head were completely unknown. I ended up sitting with Jerry in the security office for the rest of the night, and when management arrived in the morning, we explained what had happened the best we could. Of course, we sounded completely delusional. Management seemed less concerned with our accusations about the unknown mannequin and more with the actual culprit. They later found Tom's head in the basement. I never go down there, so I couldn't have known. Luckily, they let us off easy. In their own words, there isn't enough evidence to strongly accuse anyone at this time. Jerry was so worried about losing his job that he called me to vent. I assured him all would be well, and eventually, I managed to calm him down. I enjoyed having a friend like him. I considered him at least that much, and I don't think I could have ever stayed around without him. Upon coming in Wednesday night, management was waiting in the security office. "Something concerning occurred today," they began. "A child was injured once again while wandering near the unknown mannequin." "What kind of injury?" I asked with wide and intrigued eyes. "The child's entire back was lacerated from top to bottom. The day guard said that for some reason the camera cut out during the estimated time of the incident." "And?" urged Jerry. "Well, we aren't really sure at the moment. Keep an eye out for anything strange and please report all changes immediately." "All changes? Are you saying you expect something to happen?" I asked with an air of concern. They smiled. "No, of course not. It's just a precautionary measure. Anyway, see you 2 in the morning." And with that, they left. As soon as the door closed behind them, Jerry turned to me and said, "Shit's getting real weird around here, man." "Don't I know it," I said quickly. "I tell you what, Jerry. I sure am glad you're here because I'd have probably pissed myself the first night on the job if I were alone." He punched me lightly in the shoulder. "Nah, bro. You're just as tough as me." He then leaned in close as if he needed to whisper in a place with an occupancy of 2. "Besides, nothing's actually going on anyway, right?" "Right, Jerry," I said reassuringly, although I didn't share his thoughts. I gathered my cleaning supplies including the vacuum and made my way towards the exhibits. Jerry eagerly came with. I'm fairly certain he knew something wasn't right just as much as I did. We were both rather quiet that night and I purposely started cleaning the rightmost wing first, so that we could avoid the unknown mannequin as much as possible. However, I can't just not clean that side of the museum. I stalled for a long time before regrettably having to make my way to the side with the unknown mannequin. But, upon crossing the threshold of the left doorway, I stopped dead in my tracks. The unknown mannequin was gone. A dim spotlight shined on the empty base where the mannequin should have been. My body was stiff with fear and Jerry didn't seem to notice right away, but when he did, he froze as well. Where did it G go? He stuttered while pointing to the vacant corner. I gripped the handle of the vacuum. Don't know, Jerry. He looked left and right and then behind us. I'm going to go back to the office. I don't want to be out here anymore, he said hastily. Yeah, I agree. I don't think management will mind if I skip the cleaning here for one night. Jerry nodded and we both turned to walk towards the security office. The museum is completely silent at night and that only adds to the overall eeriness of the place. With the unknown mannequin missing, that eeriness had been exacerbated tenfold. We shared no words on our walk back and every shadow and even the regular figures would make me shudder. None of that compared to what happened next. When we reached the security office, Jerry opened the door. As soon as he did, he yelled and nearly jumped out of his skin. Oh fuck me, he shouted while trying to retreat away from the room. What is it? I asked with a furrowed brow. He didn't respond. His eyes were owlish and I think he was in shock. Once I looked in the room, I realized why. The unknown mannequin was standing right in the middle of the office. Not only that, but it was also in an orientation that it shouldn't feasibly be able to attain since it doesn't have moving parts. It was standing up straight with both hands pressed against its sides, palms flat to the hips. It almost reminded me of a soldier standing at attention. It wasn't facing the door, instead it was facing towards the wall in front of it. Frozen in place like it should be. As I studied it, Jerry was peeking over my shoulder. How the fuck did it get in here? He asked quietly. Hell if I know, I said just as quietly. Then, the mannequin's head slowly turned in our direction. I can't even begin to tell you how fast Jerry and I booked it out of the room. Luckily, Jerry had his keyring and was able to open the door to the museum so we could leave. I went to my car, Jerry followed and we both spent the rest of the night petrified about what we had just experienced. I tried to sleep but I couldn't. My eyes were too focused on the front door. In the event that the mannequin decided it wanted to go for a nightly stroll in the open streets, Jerry and I discussed the events for a time before he passed out, which was likely what he'd be doing anyway if it were just him working there. I was still in disbelief over the whole thing because I'm a simple man and things like that just never happen. Through all my intense thought, I must have fallen asleep without even realizing it. I was suddenly awoken by an obnoxious pounding on my window. What on earth are you two doing out here? It was day and the sun was fiercely beaming down into my car, scorching my arms and legs. When my eyes finally adjusted to the light, I saw that it was management knocking on my window. You better pray that nothing was stolen while you two were having your little sleepover, they scolded us harshly. I told them about the happenings of the previous night and they looked at me as if I were an escaped mental patient. It came alive? They asked before bursting into a boisterous bout of laughter. That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. I narrowed my eyes and furrowed my brow. I was not in the mood for the kind of treatment they were giving me. Jerry finally stepped out of the car and concurred with my story word for word. I noticed a change in management's demeanor. They must have respected Jerry's word more than mine because of his position. After they were done listening to him, they turned to me and said, "Listen, I'll go in there with you. I don't know what happened last night, but we'll get to the bottom of it." Jerry immediately exclaimed his obstinacy to the idea, but management would not take no for an answer. We both conceded and followed them back into the museum. Upon entering the security office, I was relieved to see it empty. But I was also concerned because that meant the unknown mannequin was somewhere else. Management walked to the leftmost side of the museum where it's supposed to be, and it was. However, it was not in the correct orientation and management noticed it instantly. "See? You know that's not the way it stands," I pointed out matter-of-factly. They stood silent, perhaps brooding over being disproved. Finally, they said, "I admit, that's a bit strange." "A bit?" asked Jerry, who read my mind. I shouted, "That's downright unnatural." Okay. Calm down, the both of you. Let me think for a minute," said management as they rubbed their brow and seemed to be on the verge of exploding from the immense stress that the situation had suddenly created for them. I kept my eyes directly on the mannequin. Its presence alone was enough to send shivers down my spine. A couple of minutes passed before management offered a pretty sound idea. "Here's what we'll do. I don't want either of you to be out of a job, and this place could really do without this negative thing. With that being said, I think it would be okay to haul it down to the basement. I'll make sure the door is doubly locked. Just in case." "Perfect," So you'll have the day crew do that then? I asked hopefully. The day crew? No. You two slept in your car all night, so you will be making up that work absence by carrying it down there. Be grateful I didn't fire you on the spot. While crass, their request was fair and respectable. Even if I didn't like it. Jerry and I reluctantly picked the mannequin up and began to waddle with it towards the basement door. Management stood at the top of the stairs while we shuffled down the stairs as carefully as could be. Luckily it didn't weigh much, so it wasn't like moving a couch or something of the sort, but it was still awkward nonetheless. After standing it up in the basement, management came down and draped a sheet over the mannequin. It's better this way, they said quietly. Jerry set off towards the stairs and management followed. I was unfortunately tasked with turning off the lights, which proved to be a nightmare all on its own. As I was about to flick the last switch and then turn on my heels to reach the stairs, I took one last glance at the mannequin. I shit you not, I saw the sheet rising and falling where a mouth would be, and that was enough to send me scurrying on almost all fours up the stairs. But that is not where this ends. You would think that after all that, I would have chosen to seek better employment. However, I did say I wasn't the smartest person, and that also goes for my decisions as a whole. With that being said, I made the stupid choice to stay at the museum, and to add insult to injury, Jerry did as well. Speaking frankly, I was glad he did, selfish I know. I slept very little that day, being Thursday, and still found myself strapping my boots on for the night shift. Management had gone as far as to put chains over the basement door, as if they thought the mannequin could somehow rend the veil of this world and another to pass through solid metal objects. If it could, then chains would be useless, but that night was completely uneventful and everything went textbook. Well, apart from this odd and rather loud sound coming from the basement. I did say the museum is pretty quiet. Friday night is the entire reason I'm telling you this. That's when things reached a new height of which neither myself, nor Jerry will ever recover. Like every other night, I clocked in at the usual time. Jerry was waiting outside for me and we both went in together. I got some coffee from the break room because I felt like I'd need it. Jerry expressed his opinion about the way the museum felt and I agreed. It was foreboding. Against my desires, Jerry remained in the security office. Perhaps he was too shaken up, and rightfully so, but still, I hated being alone. He offered his best wishes before I began to clean, and all I did was say, yeah, as I left the office. The first thing I noticed was that the basement door was no longer chained. Maybe the owners didn't like management's hefty measures and told them to at least remove the chains. I'm sure the day crew was being asked quite heavily on why the door needed such intense security, as if they were keeping the secret of the universe in the basement. If only they knew. That sight put me on edge immediately because the chains provided a safe feeling for me even if the danger was only just beyond that door. Everything else seemed to be in order though, so I pressed on without being too dissuaded. I decided to start on the leftmost side since the mannequin was no longer there. For the first time I can remember, it actually felt welcoming on that side, as if the darkness there had been ripped away. That was likely a product of the mannequin being removed, and I wasn't going to pretend I didn't like it. To be honest, I was overjoyed with the prospect of cleaning in peace. While I was dusting the bass guitar of Motorhead's frontman Lemmy, I heard something thump in the distance. Jerry had control over an intercom, and as long as he wasn't sleeping, I was certain he would notify me if something weird happened. Since I didn't hear his familiar voice echoing a warning over the speakers, I continued to dust away. Thump, thump, bang. 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 More sounds, but they were much louder. If I had to describe it, I'd say it was likened to what you might hear if the couple living in the apartment next to you were having a domestic dispute, but without the shouting. The noise was definitely coming from the right side, but from where I stood, I wasn't able to see it clearly. Against my better judgment, I began to make my way across the museum. To my dismay, almost every figure had been toppled or destroyed in some way. I thought that someone could have broken in and was ransacking the place, to what end I didn't know, but I only thought that until I saw that the basement door was bent off its hinges. I mean, literally crumpled like a piece of paper. And, while standing amongst the chaos, I caught movement in the corner of my left eye. I turned my head towards it, the left side of the museum, and I was absolutely horrified to see the unknown mannequin. Not only had it somehow gotten out of the basement, it was also walking right in front of my eyes. But, it didn't seem to care about me, or rather, I wasn't its concern. I say that because its chosen path wasn't leading in my direction, instead it walked out of sight towards the back. Towards the security office. I dropped my supplies and ran to warn Jerry. I didn't see the mannequin on my way, but it had to be somewhere, and the thought kept me on my toes. Once I reached the office, I shoved the door open and there was Jerry, right where he was before I started working. "Jerry. We gotta go, man, the mannequin out, it escaped the basement." He didn't respond. Jerry? Are you seriously asleep right now? Wake up, man." I inched closer to him. His fingers were intertwined and his hat was over his face. When I touched my hand to his shoulder, I knew something wasn't right. His skin was wax. He had become a wax figure, and as I removed his hat, I saw his face. It was stuck in a terrified expression. Poor Jerry must have been scared out of his mind before being rendered into the very thing he was sworn to protect. And, amidst the fear and my wicked discovery, the camera feed flashed to life. The unknown mannequin was staring into one of the cameras and I recognized it as the one closest to the security office. My impulses forced me to snatch the keyring from Jerry's side and my hands were fiercely trembling as I did. I turned to look at the camera again and the mannequin was gone. I took it as my opportunity to get the hell out of there, so I left the security office and sprinted to the front door. I didn't see the mannequin on the way, but the entire time I was fumbling with the keyring, I had the horrendous sensation of being watched, but I dared not turn around to find out. The feeling of safety washed over me once I finally opened the door. The outside world never felt better, but I nearly had a heart attack when I looked to my right to see management. They were facing away from me, but they had their phone pressed against their ear. However, they weren't moving or talking. I approached them and preemptively began to apologize for my actions. I also tried to explain the situation with Jerry. Then, it hit me. Why was management here at this time and why weren't they acknowledging my presence? My fears were confirmed when I walked to their front to face them and saw that they, too, were made of wax. Frozen in terror. My mouth was agape and for the life of me, I couldn't catch a breath. I simply walked backwards until I bumped into my car and I opened the door and climbed inside. The unknown mannequin was still nowhere to be seen. I started my car and drove home, eyes wide and bloodshot from a lack of blinking. The next morning, I received several phone calls but ignored them all. Many messages were left inquiring about what happened. They stated that they saw me leave the museum on the cameras but can't confirm nor deny my involvement with what they referred to as an awful and incredibly disturbing situation. I've kind of just been hiding in my bathroom for most of the day. I'm too afraid to face the world again and my mind cannot process reality at the moment. I don't know how any of it is possible. I never should have gone back, I'm such a moron. Hold on. I just heard a noise. Something's in my house.